Desperation in the tsunami zone. Hundreds of thousands of survivors suffer from hunger and cold, and winter weather is making their woes even worse.
The key problem is lack of fuel. The damage to Sendai's port has disrupted supplies to a chunk of northern Japan, and the consequences are dire.
At a crippled nuclear power plant, Japan tries using helicopters and water cannon to cool overheating reactors, but those measures are no match for the problem.
And reporting from Washington, I'm Katty Kay.
Welcome to Tokyo, where it is now just after 8 o'clock on Friday morning. This time exactly a week ago, Japan still had no idea of the catastrophes that were going to descend on this island by mid-afternoon. Since then, it has been battling a crisis on three fronts: the earthquake, the tsunami, and of course the radiation leaks at Fukushima. And there is no let-up in the misery. Just to recap, the official death toll and the toll of missing now stands at 15,000 people. The relief efforts in the north have been hampered by painfully slow transportation and perilously low supplies. And in Yamagata City, tens of thousands of refugees from the churning water and the radiation have gathered in scores of evacuation centres, and it is in one of those that we find our correspondent, Damien Grammaticus.
They come seeking refuge, fleeing Fukushima's stricken nuclear plant, and carrying what's most precious to them. Any who've been near the reactors are checked for radiation. More than 1,000 have arrived here already. There are reunions, exhaustion, and relief. The Odawara family were just 5 miles from the damaged reactors, and as they made it here, their fuel in their car was running out. On the map, the red zone is the highest danger. My son's house is there, says Shioichi.
All I can do is pray to God and say, please, let this end soon. That way I can still go home. But if there's a meltdown like Chernobyl, I might never get back.
As soon as food comes, long, patient queues form up. There's just one of these rice balls for every 2 people to share. But nobody complains. Incredible calm in the midst of crisis. Outside, the snow is falling fast, adding layers of complications to this disaster. The freezing weather is making an already awful situation for many that much worse. The key problem is lack of fuel. The damage to Sendai's port has disrupted supplies to a chunk of northern Japan, and the consequences are dire. The fuel shortages mean little food is reaching Ishinomaki, just a couple of hours east. So the casualties coming into its hospital now are no longer tsunami victims. They're cold and desperately hungry. Almost all are elderly. And the lobby is full to overflowing. The tsunami flooded Mitsuko Ito's house. She swam with her mother to a cupboard. Then, after 3 freezing days, she carried the 88-year-old on her back to an emergency shelter to get food, as she recorded in her diary.
First, we had just 1 small piece of chocolate each. Next day, 1 banana, then a quarter of a banana, and on the 4th day, only 1 biscuit.
Now Mitsuko has found there's little to eat or drink in the hospital too. This is first world Japan. But even the doctors are getting just 3 small scoops of rice a day. And for 3 days, Dr. Abe Masaki has had no sleep at all.
People are starving and need help, but big problem is that we cannot give many help. I mean, I cannot feed them. We cannot feed them because we don't have enough.
So a new crisis is looming here. Hunger, not just in Ishinomaki, but in dozens of already battered towns and cities where food is not being replenished. Damien Grammaticus, BBC News, Ishinomaki in eastern Japan.
Well, let's talk to Sayaka Matsumoto of the Japanese Red Cross here in Tokyo. I don't know if you heard that report, Mr. Matsumoto, but the fact that Japan cannot feed its own people in this crisis, that they can't just send helicopters up there to drop food, I find frankly astonishing.
Well, the lack of the fuel is the main problem right now. The vehicle, even our medical team's vehicle is lacking the fuel and can't go around. So now the Japanese Red Cross and also the government is trying to mobilize more fuel into this area, affected area.
But why do you think, Mrs. Matsumoto, it's been so difficult to organize that? Because I take that some of the roads have been cut and it's difficult to go by, you know, take a car or take a truck. But this country has tons of helicopters at its disposal, does it not?
Well, this helicopter has been working as well to evacuate the people and move around the medicines. And the roads are not cut off. I mean, the main roads to go up to the north, it's 60 kilometers away from Fukushima, so we are using that road fine. It's just the area got affected really wide, and then because we had a lack of telecommunication and powers down, it took a while to get the whole view of the damage and where the people are evacuated and having a need. So helicopters, still working, but also we are trying to mobilize more on the train and on the vehicles as well.
And tell me, how much is the nuclear crisis, the unfolding drama at the power plant, diverting attention away from the relief effort or making matters more complicated for you?
Yes, the Japanese Red Cross right now is not directly involved in the nuclear matters. We are serving for the people who evacuated from this 20 to 30 kilometers, and the people in evacuation centers. And I heard that some old people who need a special medical care just lost their lives while they have to be moved. In the evacuation center, for example, there are 2,500 stayed in a sports stadium and then like a field, and just our medical team is doing really busy work, and it's just quite difficult situation.
I'm sure it is, and I'm sure they are. Sayaka Matsumoto of the Japanese Red Cross, thank you very much for joining us. Well, one of the things fueling anxiety here in Tokyo and indeed the rest of the country is a wealth of information about the Fukushima nuclear power plant that is, quite frankly, conflicting. In fact, Japan's own representative at the IAEA, who's arrived here today, has said that he's not entirely happy with the information that he, a Japanese national, is getting from his own government about the situation at Fukushima. So what exactly is the state of the reactors today? Overnight, workers were back in there trying to douse the heat, as it were, but they've gone again this morning. They're resuming their helicopter flights to dump seawater onto the reactors, especially reactor number 3 and 4, which is causing the most concern. Here's our science correspondent, David Schuckman.
A glimpse into the heart of a nuclear nightmare. The first close-up pictures inside the wrecked power station. And the more the experts find out about the extraordinary level of devastation, the more they're worried. Sending helicopters to drop water is an act of desperation. Fukushima is the scene of multiple crises. 3 reactors are in trouble, but what's really alarming the authorities is the damage to the stores of old nuclear fuel.
We are extremely worried about that. The reason we're worried about that is there is a substantial volume of material there, and that this, once open to the air and starting to heat up, can start to emit significant amounts of radiation. If it starts to emit significant amounts of radiation, then that will undermine the ability of the Japanese authorities to actually work in the vicinity, because there will be a danger to human health.
So things are getting worse in the power station and harder to tackle. Reactor 3 was the target of today's water drops. It's giving off the most radiation. No one can go inside it. But what most needs to be fixed is the tank holding old nuclear fuel. It's inside these rods and they have to be kept cool in water. But the water level is dropping, so there's the risk of fire, which really matters because there's plutonium in this fuel, which is highly toxic. Now the problem is getting close enough. Ideally, those helicopters would drop right down to release their water accurately, but too low and the radiation would be dangerous. So they had to stay up high for safety, which meant most of the water missed. Now, radiation levels inside the plant are very high, but what are the risks for people outside Fukushima? Today, high radiation levels have been found in a few places beyond the 20-kilometre exclusion zone. Britain and other countries recommend avoiding a much bigger area where levels are raised. But in Tokyo, the levels are well within safe limits, and experts say that should continue. Tonight, President Obama spoke about the crisis. He said America was giving Japan all possible help at a difficult time.
Even as Japanese responders continue to do heroic work, we know that the damage to the nuclear reactors in Fukushima Daiichi plant poses a substantial risk to people who are nearby. That is why yesterday we called for an evacuation of American citizens who are within 50 miles of the plant.
Parts of the power station are described as stable, but many of the monitoring systems are out of action, so exactly what's happening inside these ravaged buildings isn't really known. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Now, as you know, Japan is a high-tech country where just about everyone has access to a portable camera, which is why this has been the best documented natural disaster in history. Every day, new and dramatic footage emerges from the moment when the tsunami hit, shot by people who are literally running for their lives. With a compilation, here's Mike Waldridge.
It was the moment of greatest terror for people living along Japan's coastline. Now we see one driver's experience of what it was actually like to be caught in the tsunami as it crashed ashore. As the wave rears up, he heads on into it and survives, though with his car afloat. And a local reporter's own story of narrow escape has just emerged too. With the water closing in rapidly behind them, he and others run for their lives. This father and two children are stranded on top of cars. And this woman clings perilously to a tree. With the help of a fire hose, she's brought to safety as an aftershock shakes the whole area. Thank you, she tells her rescuers, thank you. I thought I was going to die. Rescuing the family takes longer. But eventually, it's successful too. Mike Waldridge, BBC News.
Some dramatic images there from exactly a week ago. Now, after the break, I'll be back with more on the global response to this crisis and how many countries are rethinking their own strategy on nuclear energy.